Hyde Park this morning, and on the grass just yards from Serpentine Road, which runs through the centre of the park, lie the bodies of two women. They were spotted by an army officer riding through the park.
At 6:30 on the morning of the 22nd of September, Corporal Craig Crichton of the Household Cavalry had arrived in London's Hyde Park.
Corporal Crichton was, on the day in question, out in the park exercising horses for his troop. This is a day-to-day occurrence which has to be done, obviously, to keep the horses fit. It was as he was going up Serpentine Road that a young lady approached him and said that she was disturbed by what she'd seen lying near a tree.
Corporal Crichton warily approached the scene.
He then immediately knew that things were not correct. And he then moved off to go and inform the park's constabulary of exactly what he'd found.
When they reached the tree, the police would find the bodies of two women who appeared to be tourists. Their skin bore superficial burns, and some of their clothing had melted. But there was nothing stolen, and no sign that they'd been attacked.
And at first, police cordoned off a huge area.
We're obviously treating the matter as suspicious. We're awaiting the arrival of the pathologist to determine the cause of death.
Who were they? And how had they met their untimely end? The story begins thousands of miles away in Thailand, home of expat schoolteacher Trevor Whitworth.
Well, I first met Sunny in January 1987.
Bangkok factory worker Suni Intharabut was 27 when she met her future husband, Trevor Whitworth. He was 51.
She just finished working in the factory, and she came home very quietly, very shy. Couldn't speak a word of English, and it attracted me. I was attracted to her, or she was attracted to me. She came to England, and she then, after a few months, she fell pregnant. We married in the July, and she had my daughter in the February of 1988. I knew there was something wrong, and then on the evening the police came, plainclothes, to knock on the door, and my friend who was there at the time answered the door. He said the police are there, and straight away I knew that it was my wife that had been struck dead. They showed me a bank card, a Visa card. Then I knew straight away. I just broke down, I just collapsed.
The post-mortem revealed that Suni and her friend had died not on the 22nd, but on the night before. So police reconstructed their movements from the previous day. It was a perfect day in London. Temperatures soared.
They went around Chinatown and sightseeing, taking photographs, Buckingham Palace and Hyde Park.
Towards 6 p.m, on the other side of Hyde Park, another taxi driver had picked up his last fare of the day.
It was just a normal day, and I picked the woman up in Notting Hill, and I was taking her down to Sloane Street, and we normally cut through the park. The wind was whipping up, the trees were really blowing, it got really dark.
Getting towards sort of late evening, there was a remarkable difference in the weather.
By this time it must have got very, very dark, according to the photographs that I've got.
And the rain was lashing down.
There was immediate and very sharp rain.
It was the power. It seemed as though the lightning was coming down the road at us.
Against incredible odds, they had both been struck by lightning, simultaneously.
Lightning is simply a giant electrical spark. However, it's something like 5 to 10 kilometers long and perhaps by about 1 or 2 centimeters wide. So it's a huge electrical spark.
When I heard that they were killed and I realised that it was the one that I saw come down, I felt sick because I thought them poor girls were killed, you know, and it's horrible. It is horrible. It's like seeing a road accident. I don't know about you or me, but it really makes you feel ill, you know, but it's terrible.
When lightning strikes a body, it normally strikes it somewhere towards the top of the body, say the head or something like that. Now, lightning strikes within fractions of a second, and it's such a high voltage charge that it flashes over the body instantaneously almost. And so there are something like 1,000 people killed each year around the world. In the United States, about 100 people killed. in the UK, about 3 people on average are killed by lightning. But 1999 was a bad year. There were 4 deaths, and very unusually, there were 2 people killed on the same day at the same time.
It is a 1 in a million chance that they were under that tree that night and that bolt come down. Them poor girls, what chance of that? They've gone under that tree that night and wallop.
It's unique, at least as far as the last 20 years in the UK. The second person was killed. More often than not, when a group of people were struck, in this case only 2, but perhaps a group of 14, 17 have been struck, and it's rare for more than 1 person to be killed, if any person is killed within that group.
More improbable still, the lightning bolt had been conducted through the metal in their underwired bras.
If you've got metal on your body, then that heats up relatively quickly and can cause deeper contact burns. And then if you've got underwire bras, if you've got buckles, if you've got keys, if you've got zips, then each of those metal objects can heat up quite rapidly to very high temperatures, and that can leave a very serious burn on your body.
They say it was something to do with the bras, but lightning it hits the trees, doesn't it, normally? So, I mean, who knows? It could have just hit that tree, travelled down, and they were just standing there.
On the day before, she had this premonition that something was going. She couldn't put a finger on it, but she knew something was wrong. She came into the room where the light was off, and she started to stroke my son's head. And she looked very upset, stroking his head as if to say, "This is the last time I'm going to see you." And she made some comment as she went out the room and said something about, "Oh, we all have to meet God."
There was a brick. I read in the report that there was a brick that was in between them, and that was just dust afterwards. So the power that was there, you know, it's tremendous.
That was all there was. There was a bike and Mr. Miller, yes, and feathers on the bike.
He knew it was Ian. He had a little reflection strip on the back of his jacket, hadn't he?
I think it is purely and simply, you keep off my patch.
Ian Miller was the linchpin of the George Inn Dominoes team in the Yorkshire village of Thoralby.
He was always ready to play.
And then just same as we are doing tonight, he would play his league matches, and then when we'd finished, he would start playing for £1 a corner. And...
yeah. I just got this phone call. Don't ask me who it was, because I can't remember. The first thing I did was ring all our team. I rang you. I sent somebody up to Ian. I just rang everybody and told them that he was dangerously ill and they didn't think he would get over it.
Ian had turned his back on the rat race, preferring the life of a labourer in the North Yorkshire moors. He'd even sold his motor car.
Well, he had a bump or two with his car, and so then he abandoned the car and got this push bike. From then on, he cycled everywhere.
Yeah, he was a very keen cyclist. Cycled thousands of miles. Well respected for his cycling.
And he didn't want a lift.
Cycled to work. His mates were travelling down in a van, even on a wet day, but he refused a ride.
It was spring, the first of the new millennium.
Then he got this job building, didn't he?
Builder's labourer.
Builder's labourer.
Ray Hewitson.
That was it.
He was happy, just doing what he wanted to do.
8th of May. Just another working day for Ian Miller.
Well, he would have to leave home he would no doubt start work at 8 o'clock in the morning, so he'd have to leave an hour beforehand.
7.
7 at least, so, you know, it'd be 6. Cycle to work, do a day's work, knock off at 5, cycle back.
I think the general feeling was that he was probably in the region of 25 to 30 miles an hour in that area. And I think it's fair because it's a nice stretch of road, it's a good downhill, and if you are a keen cyclist, then you would be making a bit of progress on that stretch.
But death was waiting for him that afternoon in the bushes.
smack, and that was it. Over the handlebars.
He came off his back, we think he just hit it on the road, really. We don't know, do we?
Well, I would say he hit it on the road because there was blood on the road. So he must just have gone over the handlebars and hit his head.
That was all there was. There was a bike and Mr. Miller, and feathers on the bike.
Ian Miller's bike had been struck down by a pheasant. The pheasant had flown into the spokes of Ian's bicycle wheel. The wheel had jammed, stopping the bike instantly and sending him over the handlebars.
It's a fairly strong suggestion that the pheasant collided with his front wheel and caused him to fall off.
He was in hospital for what? For two or three days, at least.
Unconscious.
Unconscious. He never regained consciousness. Oh, everybody would be devastated.
We were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was really, well, the wife was upset. It upset everybody.
It was a freak accident, 1,000,000 to 1 against. Or was it? The president of the World Pheasant Association has his suspicions.
On the whole, man is a predator and something which, in normal circumstances, they are afraid of man and run for cover when they see one. At this time of year, they're trying to attract as many young pheasants, young lady pheasants to them as they possibly can. They get very aggressive to other pheasants. If another cockbird strays onto their territory, then they will certainly attack it. The edge of a road can form the edge of their territory. They do appear to become very confident. They appear to become very careless about motor cars and that sort of thing. A bicycle, a person on the bicycle, something a bit smaller than a motor car, I think they might very, very easily attack.
This was no accident, he suggests. The pheasant could actually have charged Ian Miller's bicycle.
The pheasant is in the hedge at the side of the road, sees this bicycle coming along the edge of a territory, and it goes straight for the first bit of it can see, which would be the front wheel.
The pheasant was never found.
I don't think you can ever say that something won't occur again. As long as we've got the roads up there and pedal cycles and pheasants, it could happen again.
All I thought was, what a waste. Yeah. It really was. Of a very nice man who never did any harm to anybody.
I think it's more the case of when you do come off your bike, you've got to be protected and prepared for it. And for the cyclist, that comes down to wearing a helmet.
And I think of the folks who it could have been, who were not much good, and somebody as good as him had to go like that. That's how I felt about it.
The function of the pathologist is really to assist the coroner to come to his decision as to the mechanism of death.
A coroner's job is to investigate all sudden and unexpected violent and unnatural deaths.
Well, if he had better eyesight, yes, he would have realised what they were.
I've been doing this job for something like about 13 or 14 years, and this is unique. I've never had something quite as bizarre as this before.
And to Wales, where the death of Dennis Verity, an 88-year-old pensioner from Bridgend, is already being described as a cruel and unlikely tragedy.
My father? He was born and bred in this country, so, in this town, so quite a few people knew him.
Well, Dennis was a creature of habit. He would come to the club's reading room every morning to see what is going on in the world.
He listened to the radio, read his book.
He would visit the club at least twice a week for the purpose of having a drink.
Well, that's about all.
And it was on holiday that I happened to read in the newspaper that Dennis had died, and died in such tragic circumstances. I was poleaxed.
That Wednesday afternoon in October 1998 began just like any other for Dennis Verity's son, Quentin.
I used to come round on a regular basis when if I wasn't doing anything else, but I used to come around regularly just to cook meals for him occasionally if I was here early enough. On this particular day, I came in late.
He had gone over to his father's for lunch and had seen his father cutting up some bulbs which he thought were onions.
I saw him was eating, so I went to the kitchen. And I'd seen something, what I thought may have been onions in the frying pan, black, whatever it is, overcooked. He said there was bulbs, there was some onions in the thing, and I could help myself. So I looked at the onions, and I started cutting one. I thought, well, onions are not this small and not this sappy. So I had a proper look and then realised what they were and what he'd done.
What Denis Verity was cooking that afternoon wasn't onions. It was a poison, a little-known poison, but no less deadly.
And I said, what have you bought? He said, onions. I said, no, you haven't. I said, you bought daffodil bulbs.
A large number of plants protect themselves chemically, and they are the masters of chemical warfare. In fact, one can think of some of the well-known poisons which are of plant origin, strychnine for one. Within the daffodil family, there are many plants which, same as animals, actually have survival instincts of their own, and it is best to treat it with the respect that it thoroughly deserves.
I'm given to understand that Mr. Verity had recently undergone an operation for cataract which had not been successful, and therefore may have had obviously some difficulty in distinguishing between what the type of bulbs that he was purchasing.
I gathered then there was something left over in the frying pan. What had happened?
This is what had happened. Denis Verity had made his usual trip to the greengrocer's in search of some onions, his favourite delicacy. His eyesight had failed him for the last time.
The smell of them is enough to realise you haven't got onions. But some people don't know the difference.
There are 7 known poisons in the daffodil plant. The 3 main ones are lyserine, galanthamine, cyalotoxin. They do not break down during cooking.
I came back the next day, and he had got up, but hadn't got dressed because he wasn't feeling well. And he decided to go back to bed then. He was violently sick all night. Called the doctors in, but they thought it was going to clear up in a day or two.
But the daffodil toxins were already finding their way to his heart.
The next day, we got another doctor in, and he said, get the ambulance in, so we did.
He would lose consciousness within hours.
He called the ambulance in, and about 5 hours later, he died in the hospital.
I read at the inquest Mr. Verity Jr.'s statement and called Dr. Alan Rees to give his evidence as to the cause of death.
Okay, there's the onion which has been cut into. Now, if you do the same into a daffodil, you can see actually they're much more easily mistaken once you peel them than they are outside.
Daffodil bulbs contain toxic substances, and consumption of bulbs in mistake for onions has been recorded with varying symptoms, ranging from dizziness, nausea and vomiting. It is reported that trembling, convulsions and death may occur.
Now, the thing about these chemicals is that they attack certain parts of the body. Some of them will actually go for the heart. Some of the other chemicals that are present go for the central nervous system, the brain. And when they're there, they do produce a suppressant action on the brain. And the net effect of that is that people often feel drowsy, they may pass into coma, and some people will even suffer convulsions from that.
With Dr. Rees's evidence presented, all eyes turned to the coroner.
There was no evidence to suggest that Mr. Verity had taken these deliberately, and therefore you wouldn't be looking at a verdict of suicide, and bearing in mind that he was short-sighted and he'd cooked these, I believe, accidentally. I recorded a verdict of accidental death.
Oh yeah, he liked onions. But because of his eyesight, it's just one of those things.
It's taken me 25 years in pathology practice to see my first case. I've currently got 17 years to retirement, so I don't think it's likely that I'm going to see my second.
I know of no other cases in Wales, and where somebody has died from eating what is considered to be one of our national emblems.
Not that I want to be cold-hearted. I just took it as it came, that was all.
There were 700 people in the church. The 400 and something odd letters of condolence came. In fact, I haven't got them all read yet. She was very well respected in the village, actually. In fact, I don't think she ever realised how much.
The morning of the 27th of January 1999, a woman's body lies on a broken quad bike at the foot of a cliff. Close by stands a flock of sheep. There are no witnesses. Betty Stobbs farmed 100 acres of land on the North Yorkshire moors.
Card the cows, milked the cows. She was involved in everything we did.
The Stobbs worked the farm as a team, but on the morning of the 27th of January, Betty had gone out alone.
Well, I had this trouble with my back in the leg, and I couldn't get onto the bike. And Betty had been feeding the sheep for some weeks. We've had these all-terrain bikes right from when the first ones came out, the three-wheelers. But we got this bigger one, so it would carry like bigger loads out to the sheep. And that morning was just a little bit slippy. And last time I spoke to her, she said, "No, be careful, because it's icy here, so watch what you're doing with that bike."
Leaving her husband behind that morning, Betty drove with her dog to the quarry high above Newfield Farm. She was carrying feed for their 200-strong flock of sheep. The feed was tied securely on top of the quad bike.
I understand that the weather on that day wasn't particularly good. The ground was quite slippy. She had one of these terrain bikes, and she went up there as she would most mornings and evenings to feed her sheep, the job that she'd probably done every day for the last 40 years.
In winter, when the ground is hard, there is fierce competition to get at the food on top of the bike.
And I imagine there'd be quite a few, you know, around the bike.
I don't think there was anything much wrong with the bike. It was just the number of sheep that were around at the time. Like there was over 200 sheep there together. It's not very easy feeding them. If you don't watch them, they take their legs out underneath you and trample on you. They even climb on the bike. Mr. Ramsey, our neighbour, lives further up the hill, had been looking out of his kitchen window, and he saw Betty feeding the sheep, and then he saw something blue roll down the hillside with the sheep round it.
It slipped, she lost her balance, and it fell. The bike toppled on top of her.
And he got his binoculars to have a look, and he realised it was Betty. All we know is where the tracks of the bike, where the marks were. We went along, and the bike was standing on its wheels, but Betty was jammed between the petrol tank and the handlebars. And we got her off the bike. There was some bales of hay nearby, and we laid her on the hay. They'd phoned for the ambulance and the doctor. The doctor came, and that's all I can really tell you.
In attempting to clamber onto the bike and reach the food, the sheep had innocently forced Betty over the quarry face. The story of Betty Stobbs was national news.
We were disturbed about the newspaper reports that came in. One newspaper was mainly, one reporter was mainly responsible for it. There was a photograph published. It was a picture of a 100-foot quarry face, which wasn't where the accident happened, and there was sheep standing on the top of this quarry. I don't know how we got the sheep there. One reporter was very sympathetic, and what she published in the paper was right.
The stories that had appeared in the newspapers, I think neighbours quite innocently said, you know, what had happened and that the sheep were around, but this was taken to mean that the sheep had actually turned against Betty. They'd rushed her, they'd charged her. You know, after years of dedication, her flock had turned on her. I think the Sun had a headline which read, "Silenced by the lambs," which had caused great distress and grief to the family.
Well, it could have been avoided, but how?
Quad bike instructor Keith Clark describes some of the basic safety precautions which might help prevent such accidents in the future.
If you're going into a field where you've got the animals coming around you, then I would stop where I am, leave the bike there, take the food off, go and feed them 50 yards or so back. That way the animals are going to be out your way and come back to your bike. They are pretty stable if treated right, but nobody can predict if the wheel's going to drop in a hole. That's why I say, you know, you should always look where you're going to go first. It's just worth it.
Even wearing these helmets and that they wanted people to wear, it wouldn't have made no difference if she'd had one of those on. She was crushed by the bike as it went down the hill. It's taken a lot of getting over, actually. I don't think I ever will.
It's about 10 foot by 8 foot.
Never ever thought it'd be fatal.
He was crying for help. He had the woman in his hands.
I think it was a week or so later that we found out the person had died.
There are some freaks of nature against which man is powerless.
Good evening. The story is making the headlines in Wales tonight. Counting the cost of the worst storms for 10 years. One death and millions of pounds worth of damage.
Gusts reaching up to 90 miles an hour. 20,000 homes were left without power.
Tiles ripped off and the greenhouse destroyed.
Ahead by flying debris.
One of the most destructive storms in a decade.
The general overall weather pattern for that time of year certainly was a very, very strong westerly wind. There was gales all the way through the Severn, and you wouldn't have experienced an 80, 90 mile an hour gust of wind in the middle of a city very often, once every 10, once every 20 years. We all live inside houses, we all live inside motor cars, we live inside buildings. We have absolutely no conception whatsoever of how powerful the weather systems really are.
It was hurricane force winds, and the only time I've ever encountered weather like that is actually being out on Salisbury Plains.
To the drama, a hero. Melvyn Burlace, ex-soldier, now a security guard at Boots the Chemist in Cardiff.
That's the only time I've ever encountered winds of that furiosity.
8 a.m. Melvyn begins his day shift. Next door to where he works, there is a flower stall.
That's been there for years, that fruit and veg and flowers. It's just been going for as long as I can remember. Always doing cracking trade.
That Saturday morning, the manager of the flower stall makes certain that his pitch is secure against the high winds, especially its parasol.
It's about 10 foot by 8 foot, you know, and we tied this one to the stall, and then the other corners to rope onto concrete blocks.
But in them winds, I don't think anything could have held anything down. It started off people with umbrellas, all their umbrellas bending, folding in and blowing away, and people grabbing onto the railings across the road, right, because the gust of winds were actually coming around the big multi-storey building, and it was literally blowing them off their feet.
Shortly before midday, grandmother Selina Andrews sets out to meet her daughter at Cardiff Central Railway Station.
The younger people, it wasn't so bad. They thought it was a lot of fun. But then you started seeing elderly people getting distressed and worried, and then babies, women with children. And basically, I just took it upon myself to get out there and try to get them into Boots the Chemist.
By now, the Met Office is issuing severe gale warnings.
Advising people to stay at home.
Mrs. Andrews's route to the station takes her through the centre of Cardiff.
Cities in particular, especially with narrow streets and trying to confine winds into smaller and smaller areas, yes, you do get this kind of wind tunnel effect where you're trying to compress winds into a tighter and tighter little space, and that accelerates them a little bit faster.
Because it was built up, I think it made it more like a wind tunnel. It was swirling around the buildings, and if it picked up rubbish or dust, it was actually like a whirlwind, and you could actually see the wind. It was so ferocious.
In spite of the storms, Mrs. Andrews decides to pick up some flowers for her daughter, who is still waiting for her at the station.
I was grabbing older people round the waists and round the shoulders because they were actually getting blown away from my grasp.
It's just after midday when Selina Andrews turns into the main street and approaches the flower stall.
If you suddenly notice you're walking down the street and you see a thunderstorm or a heavy shower coming towards you, you'll get a sudden increase in wind, and this is what's called a gust front.
Definitely was a marked difference, like, because it nearly took me off my feet.
It must have just come round the corner and come up underneath the umbrella, just hit it.
Scooped up by a freak gust of wind, the 10-foot parasol was catapulted through the air. It struck Selina Andrews a blow to the side of her head. She was knocked unconscious. Jonathan Trott describes exactly what his assistant Brian saw at that moment.
All of a sudden, there's almighty gust of wind. He was serving the lady. The lady bent down to pick up 2 bunches of daffodils. Big gust of wind. He grabbed hold of the umbrella. As he grabbed hold of the umbrella, he went up in the air. He said to the lady, "Watch out." He said everything he couldn't hold on to everything. Everything was going everywhere. There's nothing he could do.
I seen the parasol go over, and I seen this elderly lady go down. Instead of letting the people go that I was trying to get across safe, I actually got them to the store, got them to the door, told them to go in, and just rushed straight over.
He was crying for help. He had the woman in his hands. I think the security guard rang the ambulance.
The lady was already down, and there was people just stood there just watching, and the bloke was screaming in the stall and stuff like that. He was panicking, and then he's running out, and then he's holding her. He didn't realise she was hurt so bad. And I got there, and I couldn't open her jaw. I was trying to get her check she was breathing, and checking her pulse in her neck and her hands, and trying to get her in the 3/4 prone position, as we've been trained, cradling the elderly lady in my arms, just trying to comfort her. This woman appeared and she said, "I'm a nurse," and then she took charge, and then the paramedics turned up, and the lady was whisked away.
Selina Andrews died 2 days later from her injuries. The inquest looked in vain for any way that the tragedy could have been prevented.
I met the health and safety. They took the umbrella away to do all their experiments on the umbrellas, and they got in touch with the manufacturers and everything. She was there at the inquest, and the evidence, she said there wasn't much more we could have done to stop, the umbrella going anywhere.
No forecast could have predicted the fatal gust which killed Selina Andrews.
All the things coming together in the wrong place at the wrong time has led to a tragedy. And I don't really know how we can ensure ourselves or forecast to solve these kind of problems. These things will happen.
Could have happened to anybody. It was just it was, as they say, an act of God. It was just one of them things, and it was just unforeseeable. And it happened.
Coming up next, Isabella Rossellini stars in the late movie Crime of the Century.